Welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm your host, Paul Hodes, with my co-host, political strategist, writer, and consultant, Matt Robison. We're broadcast on WKXL AM and FM and 101.9 in Manchester, and we are podcast under the Beyond Politics banner wherever it is you find your podcasts. Well, as we barrel toward the midterms, the parties have poured hundreds of millions of dollars into delivering their messages to voters, and we're now entering each party's closing argument. We wanted to take stock of what we've learned from all of this, and there's almost no one we can think of better to do that than Doug Thornell. Doug is a partner at SKDK, one of the top strategic communications companies in the world. He's currently the head of its political advertising department, and by the way, one of the few Black media consultants in Democratic politics. It was announced recently he'll be the new CEO of the company. National Journal named him to their recent list of 50 people changing the game in Washington, and wrote that he is one of the most plugged-in public affairs professionals in Washington, where, folks, there are a lot of public affairs professionals. Doug joined SKDK in 2011, and he served as a top advisor to presidential, House, Senate, and gubernatorial campaigns, Fortune 50 companies, and progressive and civil rights organizations. In 2020, Doug oversaw an advertising department that produced over, get this, folks, 800 ads. I'm not sure whether that figure from just one ad firm should make us all laugh or cry, but it brings a chuckle to me. Doug Thornell, welcome to Beyond Politics.
Thank you so much, Congressman. It's great to see you again, and great to be with you and Matt.
So, we can talk about this election cycle and what the next 2 weeks will bring, but we actually wanted to take a step back with you and look at the bigger picture, the 30,000-foot view, because for a long time, you've been one of the Democratic Party's long-term strategic thinkers. Now, I know that's a little bit oxymoronic in politics. Long-term strategic thinking in the Democratic Party. Oh, my goodness. So tell us, what have we learned from the 2022 cycle about the challenges that the Democratic Party will face in the coming years?
Well, so I think there are a number of things. First and foremost is that the Democratic Party has an image problem, and I believe they've had one for a while. They have, I think, for many years, Republicans had a much easier story to tell. Cut taxes, cut regulations, tough on crime, right? Very easy to understand. Now, doesn't mean it always works, but it's very simple. And in an environment like this, where you had people very anxious about inflation, people are paying more money, crime's on the rise, there's disenchantment with Washington. Their message is actually pretty much tailor-made for an environment like this. I believe that Democrats, I think we have to, I think that, we have to do a better job of being able to tell people what we're for, who we stand for. And I think we have to be a little tougher. I think that whether it's legitimate or not, there is a perception problem with the Democratic Party among voters. And I think they believe we are weak. Now, the funny thing is a number of the people that I advise and work for are some of the toughest folks I've ever met. I mean, Wes Moore, who's running for governor of Maryland, he served this country in Afghanistan. He was a paratrooper. Mark Kelly flew combat missions, was an astronaut. There is a long list of Democrats who our vice president was a tough prosecutor in California. So my point is that it may not be a legitimate critique, but it is a perception problem that I think Democrats have to understand and deal with. That voters, at the end of the day, I think voters want to vote for people who make them feel safe. And that is not just safe walking down the street. That is safe with their economic security. That is safe with their national security. That is also safe in their neighborhoods. And if we're talking about a lot of other issues and not make voters feel safe with us as leaders, then everything else doesn't matter. It's just not going to break through, right? Like I sort of equate it to how Republicans try to make appeals to people of color, in particular Black voters, around, say, like school choice and maybe some more conservative positions on some social issues, where, maybe there is some room there for, where Black voters might be interested in hearing what Republicans have to say. The door's never really open, in part because Republicans, they have a very bad perception problem among people of color in general, and specifically Black voters. So perception matters. As much as we may want to say it doesn't, it matters. And at the end of the day, we can have a long list of accomplishments and achievements, and we can have an agenda, and we can have all this other stuff. But if they don't think you're tough, and then if they don't think you're going to keep you safe, I'm not sure how much else matters. And that can be manifested in a lot of different ways. I think Democrats are very well positioned to make that argument, because we are the ones who are standing up to the big pharmaceutical companies, right? Cutting prices on, trying to lower drug prices. We are standing up to the NRA, trying to get guns off the street. We are standing up to Wall Street so that we don't have our Social Security privatized. It's all there. It's all there. It's just, we've got to put it together in a way that we aren't afraid to be tough.
So are you saying that Democrats need ads that have us in camo, posing in tough guy stances and trying to out camo and outgun the Republicans?
No, I actually think, look, that is and I know you're not proposing that. That is that is a distorted view of masculinity that I think Republicans have, and toughness. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that people, that there is ways to tell stories about what Democrats are doing that reassures folks that we got their back. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to wear camo. And this is not about, I don't want anyone to misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we need to get a bunch of, we need to recruit a bunch of men or veterans or cops. No, there are plenty of tough. I worked for Chantel Brown in Ohio, super tough. This is not a gender thing. This is not even where people come from from a professional standpoint. This is more of a perception, right? And how you talk about things and who you stand up to. And I think that is, where I'm suggesting that Democrats need to sort of lean into a little bit more and really talking about, I'm not saying people want a mommy state at all or a daddy state, but what they do want is they do want reassurances that this person is going to look out for me and they will stand up for me and they're going to fight tooth and nail to make sure that my economic security is protected, to make sure my retirement security is protected, to make sure that my kids' education is not privatized, that Social Security isn't privatized, that we don't, that these big interests who are sort of making everyone's life harder, that you've got a voice there. And that I think is a good contrast with where Republicans, the Republican position, which is, look, we're going to turn the control over to all these different groups who don't have your interests at stake.
Well, I think we totally agree that the last thing the middle class in this country needs is a bunch of more Republican cosplaying chicken hawks dressing in camo and trying to convince them that they're the ones with backbone to
that's
represent
total
their
phoniness. It's all phony, right? It's their view. That is what I'm I think that they have this crazy view of toughness that has always been, that manifested itself in Donald Trump.
Right. Exactly.
And that's Nancy Pelosi is the toughest person I know. And right. I know Congressman Hodes, you know her well. She's very tough. Literally, I don't know her well, but I worked in the House for multiple years. And she was the toughest person I know. And but she's not running around in camo, but she exudes toughness in a way that And so that's sort of where I think, that that Democrats need to. Your big picture question was, what do they need to do, and what are sort of the learnings? And I think we have a perception problem. I think we need to look at our message and make it simpler. And I think we have to be tougher. I think we just have to be tougher. And I think people need to be safe.
Sorry, Matt, I know you have a question. I just wanted to anecdotally say that I came from nowhere in politics, and in 2006. My essential bumper sticker was, "I'm going to bring my backbone with me." Now, the language wasn't actually accurate, but the notion of bringing a backbone to Washington, D.C. was something that resonated with voters.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're not, it's not like you ran an ad which was like, "I'm the tough guy that's going to protect you." No, you use it. The language you use in the slogans or the bumper sticker, it tells a story of what your values are and what you stand for. And so that's sort of where I think we need to be a little more, I think the party needs to sort of look at a little bit more.
So if half the strategic challenge is the content of the brand and the message, and it involves something in the nexus of backbone and willingness to stand up for the values that the voters share, we're not kind of like the image of sort of the pushover party.
Right.
The other issue is sort of the rapidly evolving media environment, which is a euphemism for, we don't do things the same way that we did when you and I were on Capitol Hill. And as an incoming CEO of a major communications company, you must be thinking a little bit about that aspect of the strategic challenge and how you're going to deal with the change in the medium. So where are you thinking about investing in either expertise or infrastructure, new ways of communicating message, so that your political clients are going to be able to compete in 2 years and in 5 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, the media landscape just in the last, 15 years looks totally different, and 10 years and 5. And people are getting, first of all, people are, they're hungry for content, and they get content served to them a lot of different places, on your, on your handheld device, whether it's, what you're looking at on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook, on your computer screen, TV, right? So the way in which content is now delivered and how it looks is so much different. And I think coming up with, I think it's going to be incredibly important for firms like SKDK and other firms to be, to understand how, the type of content that needs to be created and how it needs to be served up. And we're moving more and more into a place where connected TV or OTT is a place where people are now, living and digesting content, less so on broadcast, but broadcast is still very important, and people are still running broadcast ads. The majority of television advertisements are still going to broadcast funds, but we have to understand in 5 years, that's not going to be the case. And I think there's also the other thing that I think we need to be looking at is, is the importance of social media influencers. And this is not just, this isn't like just The Rock or or Kim Kardashian. This is also folks at, Bowie State, which is near me in Maryland, or Howard or Maryland, students there who have a following on TikTok, whether maybe they're the head of the local, the college government, whatever. But those folks are, are influencers in their own right. Maybe they don't have 100,000, 150,000 followers, but if you're trying to reach voters in those, at those universities, those are people that you're going to want to engage. And I think that's going to become more and more a part of the advertising program for campaigns as we move down the road. And then also look, podcasts like yours. I had a podcast. I did about 100 episodes with my podcast. I loved it. As you all know, it's hard to monetize, but when you do get something that hits, you get a real following and you get a devoted following. And maybe you don't have 500,000, downloads, but you do have people who are, depending upon where, you have the right listeners, right? People who are opinion leaders, people who are influencers, people who can drive, a conversation. And so you're seeing more and more of campaigns and advertising on, on podcasts, which I think is you got to figure if anyone's going to listen.
Folks, you heard it here first.
Yes, advertise here.
CEO of SKDK has committed to a massive advertising package on Beyond Politics. That's fantastic.
We're very grateful. We're very grateful, Doug, for that.
Well, guys, anything I can do, anything I can. But the point is like the folks who tune into your show, the folks who turn into like a lot of these political shows, those are people who are, they potentially are going to be people who can help drive conversation. So you're seeing podcasts, just sort of audio, just streaming audio in general, is growing more in leaps and bounds. And so there are, I would say, look, OTT and connected TV, and you're starting to see more and more of those platforms move to a place where they can have, where they can run ads. I believe Netflix just announced that. You're seeing, the media influencers out there, maybe even if they're micro influencers, but if they can reach a target audience that you want, that's going to be big. And then, I'm a big believer in streaming audio. I think I think while there are still the numbers to justify doing radio, and particular communities listen to terrestrial radio, there are a lot of people who are moving, who have moved to streaming audio. And I think that's a place that, we're going to do more and more of.
For our advertisers on WKXL, I want you to listen to the first part of Doug's last sentence. All right, Paul.
Yeah. And so I have been, I went to Congress in 2007 to 2011. I was there for President Obama and helping getting him elected, and his first State of the Union address, where someone rudely shouted out, "You lie." And we thought a lot about the polarization of the parties back then. It has certainly been amplified, and it has continued from that time, which is now 15 years ago, to today. And it's extreme. We thought it was bad then, but never anything like this. What happened? Where did it start? Is it all because of Donald Trump? Is it because of some natural progression? Is it because of social media? Is it because of global chaos? How did this happen?
Wow, that's an episode on its own, Congressman. It's a great question. And I've thought a lot about this, and I have my theory. I have some theories. And so basically, I think what happened, I think in the last 20 years, let's say call it 20 years, there's been a breakdown across the board in trust by the public in major institutions that used to have trust. And I think you could point back to the Bush-Gore decision in 2000, where the faith in the Supreme Court was eroded. And then I think you move to September 11th and what happened then. And I think there was just among the country, there was this sense that like a real vulnerability that I think we hadn't felt before in a while because of what happened. And then obviously the prosecution of the Iraq war and how that sort of really ended up going sideways in the mind of the public, and a lot of the lies to justify the Iraq war. And then you go into Katrina and people watching their neighbors, maybe across, maybe halfway across the country, but I believe everyone's a neighbor in this country. But you watch these folks who are being left behind, right? Everything broke down in Katrina. And then you go into a period of time where, I think there was a hopefulness around Obama. I think Obama's term, when we look back on it, his 2 years will be viewed in a extremely positive light. He's already the most popular Democrat. He got a lot done. And I think in hindsight, the he was graded much tougher than I think maybe other presidents. But I think as you look at sort of the institutional breakdown in trust that the American people had in these important institutions, created a vacuum and an opening for there to be a much, I think a very significant partisan divide where there were no referees on the field anymore. And
can I actually follow up on that point? Because I personally, I think about this a lot as well, but without sort of your lens of expertise that you bring to it. And I mean, part of the discontinuity, I think, dates back to Newt Gingrich and his realization that there was no penalty for extremity in your rhetoric. But you didn't really see that sort of start to blossom until you saw the fracturing of the legacy media and the rise of social media. And so just to kind of follow up on your last point, it seems to me that it used to be that communications experts like you used to sit in rooms with campaign hacks like me. And I would say, you know what I want to do? I want to call our opponent a terrorist. What do you think? And the Doug Thornells of the world would say, Matt, you can't do that because you'll get blowback from normie voters who will think that that's too extreme. And the major difference, this kind of goes to my question earlier about the medium being part of the message. It feels to me like the major difference is that the falling apart of the major broadcast networks, the major ways that we would communicate to voters, and the rise of social media and these very narrow casting channels to voters meant that you could get away with much more than you ever could before. Now you're narrowcasting to people are already with you with messages that there's no downside to being as extreme as possible. And I see this most of all in fundraising email where, if you get fundraising emails, I mean, people are saying terrorist and far worse about their opponents. That's my pet theory. What do you make of it?
Yeah. I mean, look, that's my point. There are no consequences anymore. Right. I mean, like, there was a time, maybe 10 years ago where if an ad was, you do an ad and then you'd get a fact check and like the fact check was like would move around and it meant something and maybe the ad would actually be taken down. And now no one really, particularly on the right, now no one really cares if the ad is, if it's false, if it gets taken down, they'll just put up a new version real quick. Right. Like there's no consequences to lying and to, putting forward a false narrative, a conspiracy theory. In fact, you're rewarded by it because, to your point, Matt, a lot of these campaigns, they're raising a big chunk of their cash through their online email fundraising program, and it is in their interest to be as explosive and as I think as like sort of partisan as they can be, because they're going to raise more money. And I think especially on the right, you have people who will say just about anything because the more they and they go on and then they go on, they'll go on Fox News, they'll say something totally outlandish and they'll fundraise off of it. And so there are no real consequences anymore. And just let me just finish the chain of events. You had in 2009, you had 2008, you had obviously the financial crisis and people just sort of felt like completely lost faith in banks. And so you had like these sort of one thing after another where people it left voters susceptible to people saying, don't trust what they're saying. And that's what, especially on the right and their entire misinformation campaign is that they're telling their voters, like, you can't believe the news media because, the news media is controlled by liberals. So whatever they're saying is not true. You can't believe doctors. You can't believe X, Y, and Z, right? Don't believe it because it's not true. And these folks have, for years and years, everyone has been through these experiences where these institutions have left them down, and And so it's not necessarily a hard argument to make to say, hey, don't listen, don't even believe your own eyes, right? These people are, you can't trust them. You get, they're liars, and trust what I'm saying. And that is allowed for a lot of these crazy conspiracy theories and arguments to be put out there. And there's no one checking it.
Paul, I think we should give a little programming note here that we have audaciously booked one of the busiest human beings in America during the height of election season to ask him a whole bunch of step back questions about the overall political trajectory of America, instead of focusing on, the thing right in front of our face, which is the midterm elections. We committed to your colleagues there at SKDK that we would not keep you too long. So, Paul, why don't we get out on kind of a midterms focused?
Yeah, I'm happy to stick around.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
oh, great. All right. When they yell at us, though, I'm gonna send them to you.
I think I got 10 minutes.
All right, go,
Great.
Paul. Over to you.
Okay, so let's take a look at this cycle. We all know the 538 projections, the election meters, the Cook ratings, but you're the ultimate insider. You're watching the ad traffic and the polling data, and you walk around Washington, D.C. with your ear on the sidewalk, and people are calling you all the time and telling you what's really going on. So what indicators are you going to be looking at in the next 2 weeks to get a sense of whether things are going in a good direction for Dems or not? Because we're kind of hearing that things are now not going so well for Dems. And what advice do you have for people who want to look at the data and want to look at where things are going? How can people watch more like a pro?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I feel like we're at the place in the campaign where, the polling, look at it if you want. I obviously consume polling, but at this point, with 2 weeks out, around 2 weeks out, really, there are just not a lot of persuadable voters left. So, I think I think campaigns really got to be focused on how do they turn out their voters right now. I look at, of course, I look at, the national generic polls. They don't really tell you as much as you need to know about what's going on in individual House races or even Senate races. But they're good to look at to sort of get an atmospheric diagnosis of things. And we're seeing that it's sort of a mixed bag right now. There was an NBC poll came out that had it sort of neck and neck, but some of the results in there look pretty favorable for Dems. And, they go back and forth. And my view is that this race, if you were to ask me a year and a half ago, that heading into the election, that all of these close Senate races would be within the margin of error, that Democrats would have a chance to keep the Senate, and that in these House races, all of them are super close, I would have said, you're crazy. You're crazy, because historically, this should be a wipeout for Dems. Obviously, the inflation numbers aren't great, even though the economic numbers, I think are pretty good. But inflation, people feel that. Gas prices, they see it, right? But if you look at where we are today, the Republicans haven't been able to knock us out yet. We're still standing. We're going into the last 2 weeks of this campaign with a real shot in a lot of these Senate races. And that's all you can really ask for. And the reality is it could, our situation, for Democrats, we could have been dealing with a very tough Senate race in Maryland if Larry Hogan had got in. If John Sununu had gotten into the Senate race in New Hampshire, who knows how that would have looked. That didn't happen. They had some real recruitment failures. And some of the people that they nominated are so extreme and dangerous and have no business representing the state they're running for or being in Congress. And that goes down the line from Pennsylvania to Georgia to Arizona to New Hampshire. I think that candidates do matter. And we have some really strong Senator Hassan, Senator Mark Kelly, Raphael Warnock. They're all running really good campaigns. And they're all going to be really close. And they all, Matt, this, Congressman, this, they were always going to be close. And this is like the 11th round of a 12-round boxing fight. It's been going back and forth. And Dems didn't have a great last couple weeks, but the 2 weeks before that, you could say that we had a good week. And look, it's how you close, and it's how and I think don't get too consumed with the polling, because at the end of the day, there's not much, in terms of, the polling is going to go back and forth. And I do like to look at early vote numbers in different states. They're not always a great indicator, but it does, it's good to, it's one of those things. If you're asking me what to look at that, I do also like to look at, how ad spending is showing up in these different places, because Republicans did have an advantage in ad spending total for the last couple of weeks. I think the next couple of weeks, you'll see that shift. Does that make a difference? I think it probably makes a little bit of a difference. So, I think those are some of the things that I look at. I sort of take the generic head to head with a grain of salt. But I do look at like some of the issues that are driving intensity, enthusiasm numbers, another thing that I think is important to look at.
You just said the best darn thing that we've heard on this show in weeks, which is, look, all you can ask for as a candidate in this kind of environment is putting yourself in a position to win. And that's your whole job as a campaign. Right. That's your whole job. You can't control the environment. You can control what you can control. I live this. I think were you at the D trip in the 2012 cycle when I was managing the John Tierney race? We were down. Mm-hmm. Polls were showing that we were down anywhere from 5 to 10 points. And John was saying to me the day before the election, are we about to get smoked? And I said, it's possible. It's possible. All we could control was putting ourselves in a position where if things broke the right way at the very end with your ad spending and the general environment, you could catch a little bit of a breeze, eke it out over the finish line.
That's right.
Maybe that's what we're going to see.
That's all you can ask for. Or as Rahm Emanuel said to me in 2006, he called me up and said, Paul, I just ordered a 7-figure ad buy on Boston TV. Don't F it up. And that was the best advice that anybody gave me. And, we were able to eke it out because I didn't F it up. And that's about all a candidate can do.
And that's all you can do. You got to be in, the last 2 weeks, be in a position to win, be up 3, be down 3. And I think you're seeing that in a lot of these races. And, I think Democrats, the fact that we're in this position, I think tells me that the Republican argument against us, hasn't knocked us out yet. And that people have really strong doubts about the character and values of a lot of the Republicans who are running, even in an environment. And it's causing them to take a close look at the Democrat, because even in an environment where, they should be doing a lot, this should be done. In my estimation, like they should have, if you believe all the prognosticators at the beginning of the cycle, then we shouldn't even be standing around, but we are. And a lot of that has to do with the campaigns that our candidates are running. And it also has to do with the Republicans that were nominated. All right.
I feel super buoyed by this. And you know what? We're not going to top that feeling. So let's get you out on this, because you are going to have more to do than just about any other single individual with how we stand after Election Day than anyone else we know. So go back to doing that. Doug Thornell, incoming CEO of SKDK. Congratulations again. And thanks so much for being with us on Beyond Politics.
Thank you, guys. Can I ask you a question? Do I have time?
Of course. Oh, no, sure. The clock is yours, man.
Okay. Tell me about New Hampshire. I mean, you guys are right in the middle of it. You got two close congressional races, a Senate race.
Yeah.
So the Reigns of Castamere is playing at Don Bolduc headquarters after Mitch McConnell kneecapped him by pulling all the ad funding.
$5.8 million gone. Whoop, good. Goodbye.
Yep. So that's good. That's good.
Okay.
That's a good sign.
I don't know, Paul, what are you seeing?
Well, over on the first district, it's a pretty interesting race. The former president, the Great Orange Cheeto, just weighed in for his former staffer, young woman, Karen Levitt, who's very presentable. She's a big lie advocate, but everybody says it's going to be really tough. The first district is always tougher for Democrats. Chris Pappas has tried to follow a kind of moderate course, trying to say, I'm really a little independent from Dems. But that's a very close race. I think the race over in the second district is better for Dems. Annie Custer has had a pretty good lock on the seat that I held for a while. And I think Maggie Hassan is going to win. I think it's going to be a lot closer than Democrats are crowing about. I mean, this could be a 3-point victory. But given that she won her last race for her first term by 1,100 votes, if she can get a 3 percentage point victory over the retired brigadier general who's flip-flopping like a bad fish out of the water, then she'll say, well, that's real progress. I'm doing pretty well.
Well, look, at the end of the day, it's just about that W, right? I mean,
right.
However you get it, whether it's by 10 percentage points or 0.5, that's the most important thing. So, well, that's reassuring. I feel better now.
You made us feel better. So this is great. This is like the happiest.
Hey, look, my view is you got to go into election. You can't just be like, oh, woe is me, we're going to lose, blah, blah, blah. Do you ever go into I never went into an athletic contest thinking I was going to lose. No, you go in thinking we're going to win this. And you gotta feel good. You got to make sure you don't get blinded by your own, optimism, figure out different things that you might be doing differently. You should do differently. But come on, we got
time to play
left.
Time to play some Bruce Springsteen, blinded by the light, and just go for it, Democrats. Come on, people.
And for people who don't know, Doug was an accomplished football player. Cornell, right?
Cornell. That's right.
Well, there you go. All right.
Okay,
Thank
guys.
you so much for lifting everyone's spirits. And we're going to have you back to talk about the big picture again once we're through all this current, hopefully, pleasantness.
Love to. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much.